Welcome, brave souls, to the chilling depths of horror in detail. Today, we're going to share Skinwalker horror stories. First story, my Skinwalker story, Arizona. Okay, so to start out, I live in Mesa, Arizona, which is basically Phoenix, Arizona, because the main cities of Arizona spread out into many sites with no border in between. Mesa is what I would call the suburbs of Phoenix. I changed my name, of course. I live in an apartment complex I would describe as close to the ghetto, but still nice. I live in a bedroom, one bathroom apartment inn with my girlfriend. Arizona is a state full of ancient Native American history. I live next to a Hohokam Canal, as do many Arizonians. The whole place used to be cities of ancient Native Americans. The point is I'm in the area for what I believe to be a skinwalker. I'll get to my story. Yesterday, I was drinking, one of the things I picked up during the COVID-19 quarantine, or what's enforced here. And I decided to smoke a bowl on my apartment patio, which I don't usually do, mind you. I just finished loading up my pipe and taking the first hit when I hear a voice somewhere nearby. "Amanda, open the door, please." It was a young, probably in the 20s girl's voice talking, and it sounded calm and teasing. It continued on as I tried to ignore it smoking my last bud. After about 4 times of it repeating itself, my curiosity caused me to look for the source. I saw in an apartment building facing across from me movement. I saw a dog standing on its hind legs leaning on a door, tapping. At first I shrugged, of course. Then I hear the voice again. It sounded exactly the same as last time. Exactly the same, as if you record their voice in that sentence and replayed it once again. There wasn't any other sound or movement in the complex. I watched the thing knock on Amanda's door for like 30 seconds in what I would call a state of shock and curiosity. Then it stopped and didn't move for another 20 seconds until the dog thing stood all the way up away from the doorway on its hind legs and turned to face me. It made eye contact with me, which is weird because we were at least 50 yards away. I'm on the 3rd floor, it's on the 2nd, but I felt it looking at me. I held its eye contact. I was so scared, I felt like I should run. Then it got on all 4s and headed down the stairs slowly. At the bottom, it started slowly walking over to me. I was on all 4s now, about to go inside, or scream, I don't know. But I had to know what this thing was going to do. It walked close to my balcony. Yes, it was a dog, a brownish yellow, dirty-looking thing, with big eyes that were 100% attentive to mine. It didn't seem natural, to be honest, but nothing looked wrong at a glance, except that it was staring into my eyes and wouldn't stop. I ran inside as it reached the bottom of my stairs and locked my doors. Soon I heard clawing at my door, doggy clawing. Next I heard the door handle jiggle, then it started on my porch door. I, of course, never answered. Instead, I hid behind my kitchen counter with a knife. After about 30 minutes it left. I stayed up all night, but I didn't see it again, and I didn't go out again. I'm hoping it doesn't come back. I haven't gone outside at night again. I'm burning sage and trying to be careful as I can. Second story, the Skinwalker. I don't consider myself to be a particularly superstitious person. That is to say, I get the occasional kick out of the horoscope, and my boyfriend and I like to humor the idea that spirits and poltergeists exist. We even joke about how we haunt people when we died and came back as ghosts. In fact, my boyfriend refuses to go anywhere near a Ouija board. Refuses to even think of it. Why even tempt it, he'd say. Why would you want to taunt evil ghosts like that? Ghosts never play fair, and if you piss one off, you're screwed. I don't think he was ever serious. Just precautionary. But maybe he was right. God, this all happened so recently, I'm still shaken. Can barely write about it now without my nerves acting up. Okay, here it goes. A few weeks ago, my mom, sister, and I went to Colorado for an entire week of vacation. We were going to drive all over the state, visit the national parks, and go horseback riding and whitewater rafting and so much more. I was excited, and I sorely needed a break from work anyway. We drove a grueling 16 hours out there and spent our first day rafting down the rivers. After an extremely wet but exhilarating day, we drove to a ranch house to go horseback riding. We arrived at sunset, so it was too late to do anything but we had all next day to ride the trails and see the sights. The ranch was dumpy, to put it nicely. It was all run down with scraps of steel everywhere, and the shoddy lodging cabins were in desperate need for repair. I swear the roof over our shack of a cabin was a giant piece of drywall with shingles stapled to the top. My sister and I thoroughly checked the place for spiders and bugs before we even thought of bringing our luggage inside. It was only for the night, I reassured myself. Just one night in a dumpy shack on a rock-hard bed that probably had bed bugs under the sheets. I shuddered at the thought. My mom tried to cheer us up. She had brought skewers and a pack of hot dogs to roast over the communal fire pit. Happy to get out of the shack, my sister and I made a nice cozy fire, and soon a few other visitors came out to sit around the fire and roast s'mores and share stories. We talked about where we were from, where we were going, and all our adventures along the way. Pretty soon the stories turned into tall tales and urban legends and the sort of stuff you'd usually tell around a bonfire. That's when I spoke up. I love stories, especially scary ones. And hey, we're out west. We're in Native American territory. Why not liven the place up with my favorite local myth, the legend of the Skinwalkers? Now, for the uninitiated, Skinwalkers are very evil, very dangerous beings. They were humans who gained the ability to take on the form of an animal by wearing its pelt, usually through very dark and taboo magic. I knew all this and told my story. Who doesn't love a good ghost story, after all? Everyone seemed to be enjoying it. I admit I took some creative liberties, really just retold an old werewolf story, but with a skinwalker as the monster instead. I improvised a lot of the story and added a few things that weren't in the mythos at all. I gave our beloved frightening skinwalker wide, crazed eyes with pinpoints for pupils with a matching insane smile. I made the skinwalker horribly misshapen, swollen joints and arms that were too long and legs that were too short and a head that never sat straight on its shoulders. I made it as terrifying as I could imagine. No one minded. They actually really liked it. A man from Kentucky admitted the visuals alone were enough to creep him out. Victory in my book, if you ask me. And once I was done, everyone decided it was getting really late. Our firewood was dwindling, and it was as good a time as any to turn in for the night. We packed up our skewers and s'mores, doused the fire, and headed to our little shacks. I tossed and turned a lot trying to fall asleep. I couldn't get comfortable on that damn bed. A rock was probably cozier than that mattress. So against my better judgment, I got out of bed and walked about the cabin. I reasoned that if I stayed up late enough, I would be so tired that I would fall asleep no matter what I was laying on. I think I briefly contemplated sleeping on the floor. I wasn't that desperate yet. It was pitch black outside. No lights from any nearby street lamps. No car headlights. Hell, not even the cabin lights were on. And I don't remember seeing a single star. It was a bit creepy, but I shrugged off the shiver creeping up my back as simply the cold tile floor beneath my feet. I did, however, find it odd there weren't any lights on at all on the property. You'd think there'd be a floodlight on the horse stables or in the main office, but no, nothing. That was really weird. I stepped outside in my flimsy foam flip-flops to get a better look. I could barely make out the ranch. And for some stupid reason, I decided to go walking around. Eventually, my eyes adjusted where I could see well enough to navigate. I paced up and down the road where the cabin sat, and then circled around to the fenced-in field where the horses were out grazing. Except there weren't any horses. Probably in the stables for the night, I reasoned. I shivered again. It was getting cold. I turned around to head back to my own cabin. It was stupid of me to be out all alone at an obscene hour, I had realized. I needed to get to bed. But when I turned, there was something in the middle of the road. Its shape was swallowed up by the surrounding darkness. I could barely make it out. But whatever it was tall and thin. I shrugged it off as just a pole or something else and kept walking, but then it moved. I froze. My breath caught in my throat, and I could barely breathe. I just imagined that, I said. I just imagined it. I'm freaking myself out. Get your head straight. It moved again. My paralyzed throat managed to squeak out a pathetically weak whimper as my legs began to lose strength. I shivered violently against a cold that was building up inside of me. My eyes began to focus on the impossibly dark figure standing against a barely visible sleet gray night. Now I could see it. It was a person, but like nothing I had ever seen before. Its arms were impossibly long, its legs impossibly short. It had a torso far too long for its rail-thin body and a head much too big for its pencil-thin neck. Its right arm was sticking out to its side, swinging up and down. Its blockish head rolled onto its left shoulder, jerkily twitched up and down, up and down. It didn't move other than that, just stood there, twitching, arms jerking up and down, head lolling around its shoulder. I still stood there like the dumb fuck I was. My cabin was a few hundred yards behind that thing, and I wasn't so stupid as to try to walk past it. My only option was to go around, behind the cabins and the stables, and hope it didn't see me. I forced myself to lift my foot off the ground, to step backwards. My flip-flop made a loud, wet smacking sound as it cracked against my foot, and I immediately froze in horror. The thing stopped too. It stood there perfectly straight, perfectly still, listening. I stayed as still as I could. My breath was shallow and panicked, and I tried to force myself to slow my breathing before I started wheezing. My heart thundered in my chest. My whole body was shaking. But I didn't move. Neither did it. I began to slowly, so goddamn slowly, bend over and slip my feet out of those flip-flops. My feet touched the dirt and the crumbly gravel, but at least now I could move silently. I spared a quick glance to the side to see where I was going. 2 cabins were immediately to my right. I could slip between them with ease, disappear out of sight. I only looked away for a second. When I turned back, that thing was gone. It was gone. It knew I was there. It was coming for me. Oh, yet I still couldn't move. I was paralyzed. I couldn't move no matter how loud my head screamed, "Run, run, run, you run." I heard something behind me. I turned instinctively. Even though I knew better, I still turned me around. I was greeted with 2 bulging eyes. Oh, its eyes. Staring at me, unblinking, with 2 black pinholes for pupils and an insane smile that was stretched far too wide to be anything remotely human. My paralysis broke as I stared at that thing. I ran, crying my eyes out, trying to scream, but a horrible lead weight in my throat silenced me. My feet pounded on the dirt. I stomped over anything in my way. I trampled over a jagged rock, slicing my foot wide open. I ignored the pain. I ignored my body screaming in agony. I ignored my own blood pouring from the wound. I didn't care. I just ran. I felt the cold creeping up my back. Oh God, that cold. It was sinking right into my bones. I couldn't stop shaking or sobbing, and I didn't stop running until I burst into the cabin. I slammed the door shut, dead bolted the lock, and leaped into my bed. I huddled under the blankets, hiding my head, and there I gasped and shook for breath. And I waited. I didn't sleep that entire night. I was too scared. I couldn't get rid of that chill. All I thought about was that thing, standing there and twitching. Morning finally broke, and I finally allowed breath of relief. Whatever I had seen had not come for me, and now that it was light, it could no longer take me by surprise. My mom noticed my bleeding foot and the blood I tracked through the cabin. I shrugged it off, said I cut myself the night before when we were making s'mores. I don't think she believed me, but she didn't push it. We left not long after that. And as we left, I looked at the place where that thing once stood and I shuddered again. But there was nothing. I assured myself there was nothing. We said goodbye to the ranchers and to our companions. And I noticed the man from Kentucky who said had thoroughly enjoyed my story. He told me again how much he liked it. Said he was going to tell it to his own kids when he got home. They really liked scary stories, he said. And as we drove away, his head rolled onto his left shoulder, and he smiled a wide, insane smile as he waved us goodbye. Third story. Are skinwalkers migrating? If you have ever heard of skinwalkers, you know some of the terrifying stories that come with the name. You also know that there is one rule you should follow. You shouldn't talk about them, or it could attract them. I unfortunately didn't listen to that rule. Being that I moved from southern Utah to East Tennessee, I thought I was safe, since they originate from the Navajo tribes located in Utah. I could be wrong, but that is what I believed. If you don't know much history about skinwalkers, I highly recommend researching them on your own due to the fact I don't know how much longer I will survive. I live in a pretty rural part of East Tennessee. There are maybe 200 people in a 30-mile radius of me, which means there aren't many indigenous people around either. Where I live is mildly wooded on the property, and the properties next to me are the same, but towards the back, where the property line ends, it's very densely wooded. I don't know if the property owners before me weeded it out that way, but it seems that way. I live alone with an American bulldog, mix named Maxine, Max for short. What makes everything even better is I live in a fifth wheel, so you can guess it's small. The slightest wind makes the whole camper rock like a boat. The slightest move makes the camper rock too. My camper has modifications to it, like a deadbolt implemented into the door. It is kind of set up like a studio apartment, just mini. I have a couch and a full-size bed and a kitchen. It's all small but very cozy. Just enough room for me and Max to live together comfortably. My camper is insulated well, so you can't hear anything except loud sounds around you. On the given chance a car passes the property I'm on, you won't hear it. But when the rooster crows in the property just next to me, I can hear it. The crow will just be muffled. Another thing to mention is I work from my camper and don't go many places except my parents or friends if I'm up to driving an hour to see them. Max is my protector. She is friendly until I give her a hand signal. Then she will start to snarl and sit in between my legs. I haven't really seen her act protective or even heard her snarl at anything without my signal until now. Even when a wild fox or skunk comes meandering across my property, she hasn't acted protective. The only way I can explain it is she will escort them off the property. She will stay her distance, but she doesn't in a way escort them off. It's cute in a way. She isn't mean to them, doesn't bark at the wild little creatures, won't lunge or chase them. It's almost like she is protecting them. After 3 years of living here, Max won't venture into the densely wooded area of the forest. She doesn't act scared, but she won't go past the property line unless she is on a leash or in the car. After 3 years of living here, you get accustomed to the wildlife and the sounds they make at night. I would say I'm pretty confident with how well I know the area. Well, that was until now. Around a month ago, in August, I was throwing a bonfire for a friend who was going to leave for work-related things, and I don't exactly know how we got into the topic, but we started to talk about spooky, scary things. A friend of mine asked me if I had any spooky folklore to tell, since my friends knew that I lived in southern Utah and was most likely wanting me to go into mythical creatures and what I knew and if I had any stories. I myself have a very open mind about literally everything. I believe in ghosts and witchcraft, but most of all, if an indigenous person tells me shit, I'm going to believe them, whether or not it's true. Well, I gave in thinking I was safe and started to tell them about skinwalkers and then Skinwalker Ranch and how freaky it was that you can't access it anymore because the military won't let you go near it for some reason or another. I mostly touched on spooky things about skinwalkers, how they are shapeshifters, and how one stalked my grandmother. I went into the nitty-gritty. I talked about how they can lure you into the woods or desert, and how my grandmother's first herd of cattle were ripped apart and thrown around like chew toys. She lived in northern Utah. I talk about the screams and how they are blood-curdling and like nothing you have heard before. I detailed about how they can shape-shift from one animal to another, and how that animal will sometimes stand up on 2 paws and walk like a human. I also detailed how they are evil, and I made sure to put emphasis on it. All of what I was talking about had my friends in a trance. We were sat around the fire, in a circle, drinking beer, and when I spoke my stories, they all stopped drinking and focused on what I was saying. It was awesome for me, because I'm usually the back burner friend. No one really asks what goes on with my life, except horny guys on Tinder looking for a lay, or my parents. The night went on, and one by one my friends went home. Don't worry, I made sure they were sober and had a bite to eat before giving their keys back. Slowly it became only me and one of my close friends. She leaned in to ask me if everything I said was true, and I did tell her I believed in it, but it's an old tale from my grandmother and Navajo tribes. After another hour of us shitting the bull, she left, and Maxine and I went to bed. Everything was normal after that for about 3 days, then the weird shit started happening. The morning of the third day after the bonfire, I was taking Max for our normal morning walk when we started approaching the end of the property line. Max started snarling and the hair on her back raised, and she started barking at the tree line. It set me off guard, and I tried giving the signal to Max because I thought it was some drugged-up person walking in the forest. I couldn't get Maxine's attention. I called her by her nickname, then her full name, but nothing was working. She stood her ground barking and snarling at the tree line. That's when I heard a twig snap in the wood line, and Max ran as fast as she could back to our little camper. Like the sane person I am, I didn't investigate. I ran like hell. I didn't want to die, ironic, right? Once we both got inside, Max seemed restless and paced the camper until I made her lay down and rest a bit. Maybe she was having an off day. After her nap, she seemed back to normal, and nothing else seemed to happen during the day. I had forgotten about the stories I told around a fire 3 days beforehand, so I wrote it off as maybe a bear or wildcat, and it made sense because she hasn't seen one before, but it was still weird of her to act how she did. As the day grew older and the sun was ready to set, I let Max out to go and do her business before I started getting ready to settle into my comfy bed and read. Max came back and laid down on her couch, and we got settled. I must have fallen asleep reading because I woke up to my book laying on my chest. I highly recommend The Summer of '69 BTW, and a blood-curdling scream. Max was up on her couch on all fours, staring dead at the door to the camper, growling and snarling. I quickly got up and locked the camper door. I guess I forgot to before I fell asleep, and lifted up my bed to grab a .22 pistol I kept underneath, just in case. I called Max to sleep on the bed with me. I'm not going to lie, I was scared. No, not scared, petrified. Max was alert next to me as the screams went on through the night. The screams finally stopped around 4 in the morning, and I fell asleep clutching the gun. Yes, the safety was on, and there wasn't anything in the chamber, in my right hand and my left hand on Max. I slept until the late morning. I woke up around 11, with Max seemed to have fallen asleep half laying on me, facing the front of the camper. I woke Max up to take her to go to the bathroom and to walk around and play a little, and it was like she was back to normal completely. But today we didn't go back to the property line. We stayed closer to the camper and worked and played and listened to nature's music. The day went by normal. At night, it was back with the screaming. This went on for a couple weeks, and me and Max got used to it, still wary but used to the screams, until one night came along where things got even more terrifying. It was about 2.5 weeks after the blood-curdling screams started. When they started, the screams weren't close by us. They were by the property line in the back, by the dense woods. Well, they seemed to be getting closer this night, probably more towards the middle of the back property, and there were 2 creatures letting out these horrific screams. By this point, I still haven't remembered the Skinwalker stories I told the night of the bonfire. Either way, I was still terrified. But again, I got used to the screams and fell asleep with Max by my side. When me and Max got up the next morning, it was around 9 in the morning. We went outside, and it looked as if a tornado went through. My picnic table was flipped over, the fire pit had been thrown 50 feet to the right, and dead animals ripped and tore to pieces were left absolutely everywhere. And that's when it hit me, you aren't supposed to speak of skinwalkers, or it could attract them. But I was in East Tennessee, not Utah or the surrounding states, so how could it be a skinwalker? Me and Max took the 20 minutes walk to my nearest neighbor, who I rarely talked to. I had Max on a leash, and as we were coming up onto the small cabin the lady lived in, I noticed dead animals all over her yard too. I knocked on the door, and she warily opened it with gun in hand. Now, this lady isn't violent or mean in any way. She is actually rather nice. As she opened the door, she saw it was me through the screen door also in place and set her gun down. Hey, Max, and I just came over to see how you were doing. Oh, hey, Sarah, I'm doing okay. She had trailed off. So, weird shit has been happening on my property, and I was just wondering if you have heard screams or anything else at night. I noticed that you have wild animal carcasses littered all over your yard. Yeah. In fact, my dogs went missing a couple days ago, and I dash. She was cut off by something slamming down next to the house. Her house had trees surrounding her house and littered across her property mildly like mine until you hit the property line. Her property was about 2 acres wider than mine on each side, but the densely wooded forest started where mine had started. She grabbed the gun from arm's length of her and ran past me to the side of the house. I followed her, and Max went in front of me with her hair up, but not barking or snarling. When I reached my neighbor, she was crouched down and sobbing. Max and I walked closer, and it came into view that 2 dogs have hit the ground from above. I won't go into detail about them, but it was gruesome. Something had dropped them from the trees, which is weird because skinwalkers don't normally come out during the day, or so I thought. My neighbor quickly stopped crying and ushered us to her truck. She clearly didn't want my company anymore, but I don't blame her. She was going to drive us back home. It took maybe 3 minutes to get from her place to mine. She dropped Max and I off. I thanked her, shut the door, and my neighbor quickly sped off. It was safe to say me and Max spent the rest of the day inside with the door deadbolt. I heard weird sound from outside, but I didn't dare to investigate. That night, for the first time in a while, was quiet, and for a brief moment, I thought I was safe, that life could go back to normal. The next 2 nights lead me to where I'm at now, telling this story in hopes that someone can tell me what to do. On the first night, after the normal night, shit went haywire. Me and Max had fallen asleep around 9 p.m. after a fairly normal day of cleaning my property and getting it back to normal. We were awoken by a god-awful scream and twice as bad stench that seemed to be right outside my camper. I knew I had the door deadbolt shut, so I wasn't worried until my camper started shaking like someone was trying to tip it over. This went on for what seemed like forever until I heard 2 gunshots from the left. Whatever this thing was got hit, and scream to scream I have never in my life heard before. That's when the laughing started. Whatever this thing was started laughing. Like I said before, I don't know much about skinwalkers, so I didn't know they could laugh. The laughing started to go further away in the direction of where the gun went off, and then the rest of the night was quiet. Too quiet. The silence was so deafening, it freaked me out even more. The night crept on, and still I didn't hear anything. I started drifting off into sleep when I started to hear banging on my camper door. The banging shook the entire camper. Then I heard screaming, "Help me! Please let me in! They're coming! Please, Sarah, hurry, let me in!" The voice seemed to be my neighbor, but off. I couldn't explain it. On one hand, it sounded like her, but on the other, it had a slightly off dialect as hers. She had a deep twang to her voice, since she grew up in East Tennessee her whole life. But this voice, almost like it was trying to mimic her voice. The stench came wafting in through the AC vents just in time, right as I was about to unlock and open the door. I stood frozen in my tracks. The voice then warped to be my father's voice, pleading for help, but I knew I couldn't open that door, or it would mean certain death. Then came the other voice, my mother, from the second creature. But again, like my neighbor, the dialect was slightly off, but they were crying for help. Underneath my full-size bed was a huge storage compartment. It was accessible by a sliding door by the base of the bed. I had it built for metal to fit in the camper, also to use it as a bed frame, but I only kept one gun, my pistol, underneath, in case I needed to hide in there for some reason. Well, this was just that reason. I slid open the door and climbed inside and called Max to come in with me. Then I shut the door. Everything became muffled at that point. The voices switched between my siblings to my parents to my neighbor, but since I wasn't willing to come out, this seemed to piss these creatures off even more. I hid under the bed and shook until morning when I heard police knock. I was worried to come out from my metal shelter, but I did and opened the door. "Hello, is this Sarah?" Bleeping out my last name for protection. "This house." One police officer initiated. "Hello, yes, I'm Sarah. Is something wrong? We just wanted to ask some questions about you, neighbor." Bleep for her protection. "Did you witness any grizzly bear or wildcats on your property lately? Maybe even a person?" "Well, not a bear or wildcat, but some weird stuff has been going on around here lately." And I told the officers about everything that had happened in the past month up until that point. Of course, I knew nothing was going to come of it, because the police force don't go looking into mythical creatures, but they did take my statement and left, But before they did, I told them if they needed to get in contact with me, to go to my parents' address. That when they told me it was a good idea to leave because my neighbor had been brutally murdered and ripped apart by something or someone. It was her who shot at the creatures. At that point, I was done. I was ready to pack up and leave. So I started to pack everything up, and I called my parents to let them know I was moving onto their property. My dad asked if I needed help, and I obliged. And he said he would be there within the hour to help me load up my camper onto my truck, which I have only done a handful of times. Then I called my place of employment and apologized for the late reports and let them know I would get back to work tomorrow, that I was having some trouble with getting them uploaded. I was only halfway through packing my shit when my dad arrived. He didn't ask any questions, but did in fact help me pack and secure the inside of my camper down, so when traveling my stuff wouldn't fly all over the place. He noticed that all of my outdoor items have been completely trashed and pushed them to the side and out of the way, which I thanked him for since there was no way in hell I was taking them with me, especially after what I heard from the police. We finally finished packing and hooking up my fifth-wheel camper to my truck in the late afternoon, around 5 p.m. I loaded up Max, and my dad led the way. I finally felt a weight lifting off my shoulders. I finally felt like I was safe. Maybe whatever is there will stay there. My dad didn't ask me what was wrong. He just knew. And like any good father, he helped me get packed and ready to move back home. Even though I was still going to live in my fifth wheel with Max, I felt safe. As I was driving, I felt happy again, not so terrified of whatever was going on behind me. I was singing and dancing and giving Max all the love and appraisal she deserved for helping me get through it all. As all this happiness appeared, I quickly went. I looked over into the woods, and 2 creatures were running alongside my truck in the woodline. Fourth story. My boyfriend brought a skinwalker to my house. Yenad Dash. Natalie, I swear to God, if you say that word, I'll kick you out of my car and leave you on the side of the road, Haley threatened. Yenal Blushii is what I was trying to say to my friend Haley. In case you don't know what that is, that's the Navajo name for a skinwalker. I just found this out not too long ago, too. Skinwalkers are an interesting Navajo legend. Basically, they're like shapeshifters. I know a lot of people who live out in the secluded countryside that have claimed to see them. I, personally, never saw one before. Not until my idiot boyfriend brought one to my house. Now, before my boyfriend told me about his skinwalker stalker, I had always teased Haley about them. We would drive through secluded areas at night, just for the thrill of what lies in the darkness, but she wasn't a fan when I brought them up at her car. I'd make comments about them just to freak her out. Haley, what if we saw a deer standing on its hind legs in the field next to us? What if you saw yourself sprinting behind the car in the rearview mirror right now? Despite my teasing, I really did believe in skinwalkers. I've always believed in legends and supernatural beings like that, and it was interesting to learn about. Not that I really did that much deep diving into the subject, but what I did learn freaked me out. You would think that would keep me from making jokes about it in prime skinwalker territory, but not all of us have that much common sense. I'm not the only one, though. Like I had mentioned before, I don't believe my jokes are what brought one to my house. You see, my boyfriend lives out in the countryside with lots of open space around him. He's always mentioned how he felt like something was stalking him out there, watching as he moved from his car to the house. He always kind of assumed it was some type of freaky animal. His suspicions were confirmed, but it wasn't exactly what he thought it was. According to him, he saw a skinwalker in the field when he came home from my place one night. Gavin, come on. You didn't see a skinwalker. Nat, I'm telling you, most animals aren't that tall, and their eyes don't glow green. How much sleep did you get? He gave me a disapproving look. His claim was that the night before, when he got home, he saw a tall, looming creature watching him from the tree line with bright green and glowing eyes. Now, like I said, I do believe in skinwalkers, but my boyfriend also doesn't get much sleep, so of course I figured he was hallucinating something watching him. I wasn't hallucinating. There was a skinwalker at my place, and I saw him, and I literally almost pissed my pants. I promise, I wasn't imagining anything. I caved in and told him I believe him, and as long as he didn't conjure one up at my place, that's all that mattered to me. Then we went to bed and never saw any skinwalkers again. That should have been the happy ending of this story, right? Nope. I really didn't think about it the next day. I mean, I live in a pretty busy area. It's not exactly where you would think most skinwalkers reside, but maybe some have a preference for bigger cities. More people to stalk, I guess. Throughout the day, I had been cleaning the house, getting it ready for the week ahead. Since I work close to 40 hours a week, I really don't have much time to clean, so I basically just do it when I can. Time flew by, and at 8:40 p.m., all I had to do was take out the trash. It's around the time of year where night falls pretty early, so I had to take the trash out in the dark. Normally, that wouldn't really bother me, but because of my boyfriend's little tale that I happened to remember at that moment, it freaked me out. Just a little bit, not enough to piss my pants like some other people. When I stepped outside and heard a low growl, maybe that was closer to pissing my pants territory. My neighbors do have a little pit bull that they leave chained up outside, ridiculous, so I just blamed the noise on him. That's the most reasonable explanation, and to keep myself from freaking out, I had to stay reasonable. Then I saw the eyes. Not pit bull eyes. Not any dog's eyes. Nothing even remotely close to a normal animal or even human. And they weren't even green, so at least my boyfriend's skinwalker stayed behind. All I could see in the darkness of my neighbor's yard was two glowing red eyes. Maybe this was a good time to piss my pants, and God only knows I was close. I've always heard the term fight or flight, and I figure I would be a flight type of girl. I was right. I threw the bags on the ground and basically flung my body back to the front door, frantically trying to turn the knob to get it to open. I heard twigs break under someone's steps, and that's when I pissed my pants. I guess I'm more of a baby than my boyfriend after all. The door slammed loudly behind me, but nothing could mask the growling noise I heard from the other side of the glass. Because it was so dark, I really couldn't make out more than a silhouette, but the silhouette was enough to make me go from pissing myself to shitting myself. The outline looked sort of fuzzy, like it had some type of hair on its body. The worst part were its eyes. Somehow they were even brighter than they were before, a piercing and sinister red. I had already locked the knob. Thank God I formed that habit. But I needed to find my keys to fully lock the door. I didn't want to take my eyes off of whatever was on the other side of that glass, but I knew I had to. It had to be tonight that my keys weren't hanging on the hook where I usually kept them. I'll remember this the next time I toss them on my desk. When I turned back around from grabbing my keys, those glowing red eyes were no longer staring at me. Somehow that made this entire situation way worse. I needed to see where he was stalking me from. I couldn't really focus on that at the moment, so I hurried towards the door, locked it with my key, and closed the inside door. The windows were all closed and locked, so I knew that he couldn't get inside without me hearing some resistance. It took about 3 hours for me to finally calm down, but until then, I kept my eyes open. I barely blinked until the stress from the situation turned into fatigue, and I could barely keep my eyes open. I didn't feel the same presence as I did while I was outside, so maybe that was a good sign, but I really didn't want to fall asleep. I felt vulnerable enough sitting in my bed, a hammer and mace next to me, of course. But I did. I fell asleep, in my piss-soaked pants, might I add, and woke up the next morning alive. I didn't feel alive. I felt like 10 years had been taken off my life. But I was breathing and I wasn't hurt. Not physically, at least. Oh shit. Gavin. I need to tell Gavin. 10:34 a.m. He was probably asleep, but at that point I really didn't care, so I FaceTimed him. I saw myself in the front view camera. My eyes were bloodshot and puffy, probably from keeping them open for so long. I guess this kind of freaked Gavin out. Nat, what the hell? Did you dash? I know it's rude to interrupt, but I had to cut him off. I'm sure he probably didn't understand most of what I said, considering I was basically racing through the story, but his face at the end of my story told me that he understood enough. And he actually believed me, probably because I looked like I had the life sucked out of me. I haven't felt the presence of that thing since that night, and it's been 2 nights since I saw those red eyes outside my door, but I have a feeling it isn't going to leave me alone forever. I just hope that next time I'll be prepared, even though it's pretty hard to prepare for a skinwalker attack. But if I do get attacked, blame my idiot boyfriend since he basically summoned it to my front door. Maybe I'll get him to kill it for me. Fifth story. My mother is a skinwalker. My name is Noah. I live in Miramar, Florida, but every winter we leave for Colorado to go skiing and celebrate Christmas. I live with my father, mother, and younger brother, Tom. My family has always been a happy one, but everything changed when we went to Colorado this winter. My mother was always a caring woman. She'd give constant hugs without any reasons with smiles brighter than the sun. And one thing for sure, she loved her family. One very dark night, the electricity went out and darkness was thick. As any normal people would, we had some candles lit to provide us with some comfort of light. You'd have thought that people of our stature would have owned a generator, right? But that's my father's fault. His procrastination caused that. He had been promising my mother an eternity that he'd have bought a generator. We were short on candles, though, so my father went and got his keys to drive in town for some supplies. Hoping that the lights would have came back by morning, I went to my room to sleep it out. About 40 minutes into sleep, I heard my brother calling me from outside. This was strange, though, as my younger brother was very afraid of the dark, and his room was right next to mine. "Noah, come look at this," my brother hurled. I then got out of bed and checked my brother's room, because there was no way my little brother, who was so terrified by darkness, was outside, and there he was sleeping like an angel. Skreek. The front door slowly opened. I quickly ran downstairs to see who or what had opened door. I went to look downstairs when I barely glimpsed my mother's silhouette going through the door. I could hear her talking. "Tom, baby, what are you doing outside?" "Come on in," she said. My brain went in shock as I knew that I couldn't be Tom, as I had already checked. Just mere seconds later, I heard the ear-hurting screams of my mother's voice. It felt like a knife was being jabbed in my ears. I ran to the kitchen to grab a knife or something to help my mom. As I rushed out there to what was a gruesome sight, there was an inhumane creature devouring my mother. The stench was putrid, and its eyes were as red as the devil's. Its skin was like fur like that of a coyote, and its mouth opened wide like around 25 inches or so. I stood there in shock, unable to move, with what was supposed to be a weapon in my hand, a knife to be exact. But against this monster, I guess a knife is useless. Flickering up to the cabin were my dad's car lights approaching. The creature then started contorting. It had changed into my mother's skin, looking exactly like her. My father pulled in the driveway and said, "What are you guys doing out here?" "Oh, hun, we were just talking," the creature said with my mother's beautiful voice. "Dad, that's not MOM. Whatever that is IT, isn't it?" I shouted. "What you say, my son? Stop this nonsense," it said. My father simply shrugged me off, saying I need to get back to sleep because I'm talking nonsense. I kept trying to warn him, but he simply dismissed me and sent me to my room. For nights, I couldn't sleep thinking of what I'd saw. It made me squeamish thinking of my mother's screams and how vile it was seeing that monster swallow my mother's body whole. It's been a year, and that thing acts and behaves exactly like my mom. It has all my mother's memories. Everything. I've heard of skinwalker stories before, so I now had an idea of what creature it was. Sometimes I wonder if it was all a dream, but if it's not, I know that out of everything I must protect my brother. At any cost. Anything. Sixth story. The night I met the skinwalker. I've never been one for posting my experiences online, but after what happened last week, I feel like I don't have a choice. I need to get this out of my head. Maybe someone will believe me. Maybe someone will know what I'm supposed to do next, because I can't stop thinking about it. It all started when I went back to my hometown in New Mexico. I hadn't been there in years, but my parents still lived in the same house I grew up in, and guilt had been gnawing at me for avoiding them. It was a small, quiet desert town, surrounded by endless stretches of wilderness. The kind of place where stories linger longer than the people who tell them. One evening, during dinner, my dad mentioned the hiking trails we used to explore when I was a kid. He said they'd reopened recently and casually suggested I check them out. But stick to the main paths, he warned. A lot of strange stuff happens out there. I brushed it off as a typical small-town superstition. Growing up, I'd heard my share of stories about weird lights, unexplainable noises, and the ever-popular Skinwalker legend. It always felt like a scare tactic to keep kids from wandering too far. I'd spent hours out there as a teenager and never saw anything unusual. So, the next evening, I grabbed a flashlight and headed out just before sunset. The trails were overgrown, but still recognizable. The air was crisp, and the fading sunlight painted the horizon in warm shades of orange and pink. I took my time, letting nostalgia guide my steps, until I reached a fork in the path I didn't remember. One direction led uphill toward the ridges overlooking the valley. The other curved downward, following the sound of rushing water. The river wasn't on the original trail map, but the sound of water was strangely inviting. I figured it might be worth exploring. I turned my flashlight on, even though the fading twilight still offered some visibility, and started down the slope. The air grew colder the closer I got to the river, and the trees became denser, their gnarled branches arching overhead like a tunnel. The sound of water grew louder, echoing off unseen rocks. Something about it fell off. The rushing water had an uneven cadence, like it was stuttering. My footsteps, too, seemed to echo strangely, just slightly out of sync with my movements, like something was walking a beat behind me. I kept stopping to listen, but every time I did, the forest fell completely silent. When I reached the riverbank, the sight was both beautiful and eerie. The water reflected the pale moonlight, shimmering as it flowed over jagged stones. But the landscape didn't feel right. The trees along the bank seemed unnaturally twisted, their trunks warped as if they'd been bent by unseen hands. The air smelled metallic, sharp, and out of place. That's when I noticed the tracks. They were in the mud near the edge of the river. Huge, elongated prints. At first glance, they looked human, but something was off about the proportions. The toes were too long, the heel too narrow, and they sank deeper into the mud than any person's weight could justify. I crouched down to get a closer look, and that's when I heard it. A voice. My voice. Help me. It came from the other side of the river, low and rasping, but unmistakably my own. I froze, my heart hammering in my chest. It wasn't an echo. It wasn't the wind. It was me, calling out from somewhere in the trees. Help me. It said again, louder this time, a desperate, broken plea that sent chills down my spine. The flashlight trembled in my hand as I scanned the opposite bank, the beam cutting through the darkness. That's when I saw it. It was crouched near the water's edge, its pale, sagging skin catching the light. At first, I thought it was a man, but the longer I stared, the less human it became. Its limbs were unnaturally long, bent at strange angles like a marionette with tangled strings. Its head hung low, the face obscured by matted hair, but I could feel its eyes on me, black, soulless pits that seemed to drink in the light. Help me, it said again, but this time its mouth moved and the words didn't match the sound. The voice was still mine, but the thing's lips jerked open and closed like a bad animatronic. The pauses between the words were wrong, fragmented, as if it was struggling to piece them together. Help me, it croaked again, dragging out the last syllable. It stood then, rising to its full impossible height, its head nearly grazing the branches overhead. The skin around its joints cracked and stretched as it moved, like it was wearing a suit that didn't fit. I stumbled backward, my foot catching on a root, and fell hard into the mud. The flashlight slipped from my grip, rolling a few feet away. In the chaos, I looked back across the river, but the thing was gone. My breath came in ragged gasps as I scrambled to my feet, searching the tree-line with shaking hands. The forest was silent now. Even the sound of the water seemed muffled. Then I heard the crunch of gravel behind me. It was on my side of the river. I didn't look back. I couldn't. Every instinct in my body screamed at me to run, so I did. I tore through the trees, branches whipping at my face, the flashlight beam bouncing wildly ahead of me. Behind me, I heard it crashing through the underbrush, its movements uneven and wet like something crawling and stumbling all at once. and then it began to mimic me. It called out my name over and over in my voice. "Come back. Please," it wailed. "Wait for me." The desperation in its tone was uncanny, like it was trying to crawl inside my head to make me feel sorry for it. I don't know how I made it back to the main trail. I don't remember the details. I just remember the relief of seeing my car in the distance and the sheer terror of hearing its footsteps growing louder. I dove into the driver's seat, locking the doors and starting the engine in one motion. As I peeled out of the parking lot, I caught a glimpse of it in the rearview mirror. It was standing in the middle of the trail, its head tilted at an unnatural angle, watching me. Its mouth hung open, that horrible grin stretched wide across its face. And then it waved. I don't know how I made it home that night. My hand was shaking so badly, I almost crashed twice. I spent the night sitting in a corner of my bedroom with the lights on, clutching a baseball bat like it would make a difference. The worst part came the next morning. When I opened my front door, my flashlight was lying on the porch. It was clean. I'd seen it fall into the mud when I tripped, rolling down the slope toward the riverbank. There was no way it should have been here, clean, spotless, like it had never left my hand. I haven't gone back to the trails since, and I don't think I ever will. But sometimes late at night, I hear something outside my window, a soft knock followed by the sound of my own voice begging me to let it in. I didn't sleep much after that night. Even with the lights on, even with the bat clutched in my hands, I couldn't close my eyes without hearing that soft knock on the window or the distorted echoes of my own voice calling out to me. Every sound outside, branches brushing against the house, a coyote howling in the distance, set my nerves on edge. I started to question what was real and what was in my head. But I didn't dare look out the window. The knocking didn't come every night. Some nights were eerily quiet, which almost made it worse. At least with the knocks, I knew where it was, or thought I did. On the quiet nights, I could feel it watching me, its presence like an unseen weight pressing against the walls of the house. I kept every door locked, every curtain drawn, and the flashlight within arm's reach. It wasn't enough. 3 nights after my encounter, I woke up to something new, the sound of footsteps on the roof. Slow, deliberate footsteps, like someone or something was pacing back and forth. My bedroom is on the 2nd floor, so it was right above me. The ceiling seemed to creak with every step, each one sending a chill down my spine. I gripped the bat tighter, my breathing shallow, tried to convince myself it was just an animal. But deep down I knew better. "Let me in." The words were muffled, coming from somewhere above. It was my voice again, but weaker this time, like it was strained or dying. The footsteps stopped directly above my bed. "Please, I'm cold." It spoke again, but this time it wasn't just my voice. There was something else beneath it, like a guttural growl, trying to mimic human speech. I clamped my hands over my ears and squeezed my eyes shut, willing it to stop, willing it to go away. The pacing resumed, faster now, erratic like it was angry. And then it was gone. Morning brought no comfort. There were no signs of footprints on the roof, no damage, nothing to prove I wasn't losing my mind. But the smell, that metallic coppery tang, still lingered faintly in the air. It was the same smell from the river, the same smell that clung to the SKINWALKER. It was real, and it wasn't leaving. I thought about telling someone, but what would I even say? No one would believe me, not without seeing it for themselves. Even then, would they? I debated leaving town, driving as far away as I could, but I had this gnawing feeling that it wouldn't matter. It had found me once. It would find me again. That afternoon, I decided to confront it. Not because I was brave, but because I was desperate. I needed to know if it was real, if it was still watching me, or if I was losing my grip on reality. I waited until dusk, when the shadows were long and the air carried that faint metallic edge. I left the house with my flashlight and bat and started walking toward the river. The town was quiet as I made my way out to the trails. Too quiet. No dogs barking, no cars passing by, not even the faint hum of insects. Just my own footsteps crunching against the gravel. By the time I reached the trailhead, the sun had dipped below the horizon, leaving me alone in the dark with only the beam of my flashlight to guide me. As I moved deeper into the woods, the air grew colder, heavier, like the forest was holding its breath. I could feel it watching me, even before I saw it. My flashlight flickered as the sound of rushing water grew louder, and I knew I was close. But I wasn't prepared for what I saw when I reached the riverbank. It was standing in the middle of the water, partially submerged, its head tilted at that unnatural angle. The moonlight caught its pale, sagging skin, making it almost glow. Its eyes, black, endless pits, locked onto me as soon as I stepped into view. "Why?" I managed to choke out. My voice sounded small, pathetic, even to me. "What do you want?" It didn't move at first. It just stared, its expression unreadable. Then it smiled. That same horrible, too-wide grin that stretched its face like a rubber mask. "Ew," it said, its voice layered and distorted, shifting between my own and something inhuman. "You brought me here." I don't remember running. I don't remember much at all after that. Just fragmented flashes of terror. The crashing sound of branches behind me. The flashlight flickering wildly as I sprinted down the trail. The growing realization that no matter how fast I ran, it was keeping pace, its footsteps uneven and wet, always just out of sight. When I finally broke out of the woods and into the edge of town, I felt like I'd crossed an invisible boundary. The air felt lighter, cleaner, and the oppressive sense of being watched lifted, if only slightly. I didn't stop running until I reached the first lit building I could find, a gas station on the outskirts of town. The clerk gave me a strange look as I stumbled inside, gasping for breath, covered in sweat and dirt. I tried to explain what had happened, but the words wouldn't come. All I could manage was, "Please don't let it in." I stayed there for hours, too scared to leave, too scared to tell the full story. The clerk humored me, locking the doors and keeping an eye on the windows, though he clearly thought I was crazy. At some point, I must have fallen asleep in one of the plastic chairs near the counter. When I woke up, the gas station was empty, the doors unlocked, the lights flickering. I was alone, and that metallic smell was back. The faint sound of footsteps echoed outside the door, slow and deliberate. I held my breath, praying it wouldn't come inside. And then the lights went out. If anyone has heard of something like this, please let me know. I don't know how to make it stop, and I'm running out of places to hide. Seventh story: How to Outsmart a Skinwalker. If you're reading this, congratulations, I am probably dead, or worse. My name is Daniel, and I own quite a bit of land up in the Appalachian Mountains, left to me by my great-aunt. So far, in the years I've lived here, paranormal and downright disturbing things have happened to me here. People told me to just leave or report it, like I've never done that before. To them, I'm just a young guy that went crazy a little too early. It bothers me that normal people have no idea what goes on up here all alone. My first encounter with them, I didn't know how to deal with them. Heck, I didn't even know what they were called until recently. It's important, or at least it's important to me, that some of the tricks I've learned throughout the 3 years I've lived up here could be of use to somebody. My second, or maybe third time I was stalked by a skinwalker, it felt like I was walking in circles. I had a trail camera with an SD card pretty deep in the woods. But when I tried to walk back to my cabin, I kept passing the camera. I was effectively walking in circles. This went on for hours. The sun was setting soon, and I was quite thirsty at the time I remember. I sat up against the tree my camera was mounted on and started softly crying. It was watching me. I guess waiting for me to fall dead. I hit myself in desperation a few times, trying to think. I sat up and took a very deep breath, wiped the water from my eyes, and it dawned on me. It's got to be messing with my equilibrium. I have to be off balance. There's no other way. Teleportation in hindsight sounded stupid, but I could still walk, but my depth perception was slightly off. All I had to do was tilt my head as far as it would go into my shoulder and walk back to my cabin. My ear was pressed into my shoulder, but even with one ear, I could still hear how anxious the creature sounded pacing in the woods, hoping I didn't get away. Once I made it inside my cabin, I didn't come out for a couple days for safe measures. Another trick they know is mimicking animals. I found that they like coyotes. I used to coyote hunt quite a bit back home, but never up here in the mountains. I seen on a couple of my deer cameras that it looked like right after I left my camera, a coyote would follow me a while, if not all the way home. I had to stop that real quick and set out some snares. All a snare would and could do is jam the coyote's leg into the mechanism until a button is pressed and the thing would unlock. I set out a couple of them, but also rubbed white ash on all of the traps, and sure enough, the next time I start walking back from my camera, I hear the sound of one go off. I quickly ran back to where I'd laid the trap's gun drawn, and all that was left was the trap in 3 separate bent-up pieces and the subtle scent of burning hair in the air. Every time I checked the camera after that, a coyote with a nasty burn scar on its leg would stop where the camera was mounted and turn around and walk back into the brush. And lastly, do not engage in any type of combat with them. Warding them off is one thing, but actively hunting them is a mistake. I'd wish I would have known that sooner. I had 2 buddies back in town I used to tell my stories to. Alcohol loosens the lips. Their names were James and Cole. I'm pretty sure they were cousins, but I never asked. Thinking about it now, I wish I would have gone and known them better. Long story short, they're dead, and I'm dying. This morning they came and pounded in my door, insisting we hunt these skinwalkers. I told them it was a very bad idea, but they even took the liberty of buying silver bullets. They told me how much they cost, but I can't remember right now. I finally caved, and we prepared all day. We first started making a large amount of white ash, cleaning our guns. Heck, they even packed MREs and special high-dollar spotlights. We set off right as the sun went down. We weren't 3 hours in when disaster struck. We're all sitting around a tree. I could tell these skinwalkers were watching us. They're all around us. Multiple. I'm frantically scanning everything with my spotlight, not even realizing Cole wasn't with us anymore. I asked James where he was, but he didn't seem nervous at all and told me he may have had a pee. I turned back to face my front, and there I see Cole. He's a good distance out, but something wasn't right. He was contorting in ways a human could never. I started to turn around to ask James what we should do, but halfway around, I heard James' guttural sounding breathing like his lungs were filling with blood. I couldn't stand to be there anymore and booked it back to the cabin. The forest seemed like it was laughing at me in my desperation to run home. I knocked my flashlight running, and it was slowly getting dimmer and dimmer. I eventually had to ditch it and use some of the flares Cole and James bought. I pulled the top off and struck it against a tree, and the red flame lit up the surrounding forest. There were so many of them. 10, 20, probably more, but as luck would have it, they never attacked me. I could see the cabin and flung the door open and shut it behind me. I ran for the upstairs bedroom and quickly got into the old wooden closet where I'm typing this. I don't hear them, but they're outside my house. Unfortunately, I did end up getting clawed or maybe bitten. It's not a terrible wound, but it's bleeding black. If you can send help, please do. I really need it this time. 8th story. Did I see a skinwalker? First of all, I'd like to apologize for any grammatical errors. I also don't spend much time on Reddit, so I have no clue if this is the right subreddit to post this in, but I know you guys know your shit, so I assume it's the best place to ask. Secondly, I only just recently learned what a skinwalker is, and I still don't know much about them, which is why I'd like other people's opinions. This happened in September of last year. We live on a huge horse farm in southern KY. My mother, the horse fanatic in the family, travels all over the country taking out horses to shows and competitions. During that time, I usually get stuck at home with the responsibility of feeding the animals and other non-show horses. My parents were at a weekend-long show. It was around 5:30 p.m., and I was on my way down to the barn to give the horses their evening meal. Our horses are arranged in multiple sections. Pregnant Mares in one, show horses in another ECT. Hey, raise a screen cap from Google Earth of it to kind of give you guys an idea. Imager. I was almost done feeding and only had the southwest corner section to go when I looked into the field that lined that section that we let the horses graze in the spring and saw something that I really can't explain with words. It was far enough away that I couldn't make out facial features, but I could tell it wasn't human. It was standing upright, 2 legs that seemed to be on backwards. Instead of the knees going forward, they went the opposite way. The closest thing I could describe it to would be like a very thin, hairless, less horse standing up. I didn't notice any arms, but with how far away it is, I'm assuming they could have just been so close to the body that I didn't see them. I kind of doodled this to give you guys an idea of what it looked like. It scared the hell out of me, but I don't think it saw me. It looked like it was watching my house, which was about 100 yards to the northwest of there. I kind of just stood there. I didn't really know what to do, so I just kind of slowly started backing up until it was back in the barn. There's a small part in the barn where there are a couple missing boards that you can easily see out of, so I stood there watching it for a while. I didn't want to try to go back home because I was worried it would see me, so I just waited. I waited for what felt like forever before this thing kind of turned around and walked away into the woods. The way it walked was the scariest thing about it. It was so unnatural. I waited a little bit, then ran back to the house as quickly as I could. The next morning my parents got home, so I didn't have to feed the horses again after that. I've never told anyone about this either, but after discovering skinwalkers, I'm wondering what you guys think. If not a skinwalker, what else could it be? Thanks a lot for watching the video. Till the end, subscribe to Horror in Detail for more videos. Drop your suggestions in comment section.